Hello class, once again. We were talking about objects on our last video, and today we are going to continue talking about retained objects. If you remember, we discussed that we have three different types of objects. We have what we call direct objects, we have indirect objects, and we have retained objects, right? So we have discussed so far about direct objects, we have discussed indirect objects, and we are missing retained objects. A quick recap about direct objects. Direct objects are the recipient of the action, right? Whatever action the subject performs falls on the direct object. Remember that not every sentence is going to have a direct object for reasons that we discussed in previous videos. And in order to find the direct object, we need to ask two questions. Either of two questions, we can ask the question whom, and we can ask the question what, right? If we get an answer to these questions, remember, after the verb, then we say we have a direct object. And after the direct object, we discussed about the indirect object. In order to find the indirect object, we have four different questions that we can ask. And if we get an answer for one of these four questions, then we have an indirect object. The questions are to what, for what, to whom, and for whom. If you get an answer to one of these questions, to any one of these questions, after the direct object, of course, remember that you need to have a direct object in order to find an indirect object, then we'll say that we have a direct object. And also remember that in order to find an indirect object, we are going to find it before the direct object. We don't place it after the direct object. I mean, we can place the indirect object after the direct object, but in this case, like in this example that I am showing you right now, Roger sold a car for me. The indirect object loses its quality of indirect object because it becomes the object of the preposition. But teacher, it's still an indirect object. Yes, in meaning, it's the recipient of the direct object, but structurally, it is the object of the preposition, because remember that every preposition must have an object in English. If a preposition doesn't have an object in English, two things are happening. Either we have made a mistake and we are classifying a something that is not really a preposition, most likely an adverb, or possibly also an adverb, or we have made a mistake in the sentence and the sentence doesn't make sense. And let's talk now about retained objects. Retained objects are basically the same as direct objects. They are the same. They are going to respond the same question. You see, a retained object is quite similar to the direct object. You need to have a transitive verb, and it has to answer the question what or whom. So if it answers the same questions, and if it also needs a transitive verb, what is the difference between a direct object and a retained object? Put simply, retained objects only happen in passive voice. You will only find a retained object in passive voice, and it's the object that remains, especially, well, not especially, in the case when we have two objects before the transformation of the sentence in passive voice. There are other videos when I talk a little more about the sentence elements, taking into consideration more complex structures, where I discuss this. Right now, this is not something that I would like to discuss with you guys, because I don't want to create confusion or further doubts. But we will study this later, especially when we study passive voice in English grammar too. So just remember, if it's in passive voice and you have an object, that object is going to be classified not as a direct object, but as a retained object. Check this example. Joshua was sent a beautiful postcard from Rome. Okay, Joshua was sent, here is the verb, right? Joshua was sent what? A beautiful postcard from Rome. So that is the retained object. As you can see, it's basically the same thing as the direct object, but it happens only in a passive voice, and a passive voice that of course has retained an object, right? Which is not always the case. Many times that's not the case. And this is a short video where I explain the retained objects, and I am going to stop it right here. And I hope you all have a nice day, guys. Bye bye.